Today we have Bob Brown. You have already seen him in the past, but let me just quickly reintroduce. Bob Brown is an experienced banker with a 40 years industry experience in broad array of areas within community banks and credit unions. He has strong leadership skills combined with long track record of innovation. He was a co-creator of Check 21 and is a strategic advisor at Visa. Welcome back to today's continuing discussion on why banks fail. This is our second discussion. We are all going to start this session by speaking about a quick social cause called Movember. This is an annual event involving growing of mustache during the month of November to raise awareness of men's health issues such as prostate cancer, testicle cancer, and men's suicide. The Movember Foundation runs the Movember charity event, and if you want to know more, please visit Hexanica webpage on LinkedIn, and you will get links by end of this week, and you can contribute to this. Anyway, back to the main topic. Bob, we had a session last time, and in that session, we spoke about few items. We started with management as one of the key items when it in terms to our consideration when it comes to bank failure. And today we are going to speak about the governance and particularly around board and executive oversight. Would you like to share some thoughts before we actually get into this topic?
Probably the most important place to start when it comes to how does a bank or credit union handle formal agreements like consent orders and cease and desist orders. If the tone from the top is not correct, the rest of the organization will not react appropriately, and the financial institution will probably never exit from this agreement, or it'll take multiple years to get out from underneath the agreement.
I agree. Now, within these topics, there are several aspects that you mentioned are happening, and it starts with the denial of various aspects: denial to change, denial to accept mistakes, denial to consider external support, and other forms of denial. Would you like to share some thought on these key reasons of why banks fail?
Yes, thank you. So if you talk to experts in this field, we all agree that the number one problem for financial institutions when it comes to addressing things like consent orders and cease and desist orders is denial. If the leadership of the financial institution can't get past that one basic point and move on to correcting the issue, then they will never get this thing addressed in a timely manner. We see consent orders extending 6 and 7 years sometimes because the banks put this thing on the back burner and they don't address the primary issues that the regulators have brought to their attention. The first clue you normally hear is we've always done it this way. And you'll hear that from board members, senior executives, all the way down to clerical people that will sit there and say, well, we've always done it this way. They may have been there for 30 years. They may have been there for 30 days, but they'll give you that excuse as a reason not to change. Or they'll tell you that we're following our procedures. Now, the procedures maybe have been reviewed in 10, 20 years, and the rest of society has moved on, but the financial institution has not. Or specifically in smaller banks, you'll hear them say, we can't afford to make those changes. And what they're really saying is, we don't want to make those changes. And so we're going to use the excuse of affordability is the reason why they're not making the changes, but they're not factoring in the cost of operating under a consent order, or a C&D, which far outweigh in most cases the cost of making these changes. Then there's the denial. There's nothing really wrong here. And then they'll blame it on one of their employees, and they'll make it an exception, or they'll say we only have a few problems, never really accepting the fact that they've made some mistakes. They identified they made a mistake in most cases, or the examiners have, and then they still refuse to address that issue. Or they'll say we don't need any help. We've been through tough times before. We'll get through this also. Well, most of them have not been through tough times, or not really tough times, and they don't understand how difficult this can be. Many times they'll say, well, we're bringing in a retired banker who's a friend of our chairman or the senior executive team. And usually this retired banker has no experience in doing turnaround activities. And so they really have a problem when it comes to addressing the core issues that the examiners are bringing to bear. Usually the problem the examiners have is with whoever is running the bank or the credit union at that time. And you need to address not only what's written down in the formal agreement, but you need to address what the core issues are that are not addressed in the formal agreement. Other forms of denial is say, well, we fixed before the examiners left. I had a customer that had a Reg O violation, and we had an executive with 30 to 40 years experience tell me he did not know what Regulation O was, and that Regulation O applied to him. And that's extremely hard to believe in these days. Or they say, well, we don't have time to work on that now. But so they'll allow these formal agreements to go for 6 or 7 years while they find time to finally work on these things, when they could have gotten out from underneath these things in 3 years or less and avoided the cost of extra FDIC insurance throughout that period of time. Or they claim they didn't know that what they were doing was wrong. And again, if they didn't know, then there's probably a problem with their training that needs to be addressed, because they should have known that what they were doing was wrong. Yogesh?
Yes, Bob, I mean, I've personally experienced, I've been a banker as well. Although may not be community banks or credit union at large bank, but a lot of these aspects actually resonate with large financial institution as well, in terms of there may not be a denial, but there is surely a resistance, huge resistance to make the change. Then there is also that sometimes in the large banks, arrogance, ego, that we know the industry and we know these things, while the new fintech or even the new tech companies are now in the lending business, payments business, and other businesses that traditionally have been the businesses of banks, except for deposit. Perhaps they are doing anything and everything possible without having a banking license. And because of that resistance, also the fear factor or whatever to take the support. So you are spot on all these. But I think there is another unique aspect that we had discussed was around just blaming it on perhaps an external party for the issues that you have internal. So any inputs, any thoughts, or any experience, or any suggestion for that matter also on this particular topic?
Yeah, you'll see many times they want to blame the examiners. And in particular, I see this with some of the older members of management that, we've always done it this way. It's always gotten us along in the past, and it should go forward in the future. They'll tell us that the examiners don't understand their business. They'll say the examiners aren't being fair. And I got to tell you, I don't know of any place inside the examination manual that requires an examiner to be fair. The examiners just need us to give us more time. Well, again, I don't know where in the manuals it says the examiners have to give them more time, and I don't know how much time is reasonable. 6 or 7 years is not a reasonable period of time to address some of these issues. The examiners are being unreasonable. The examiners have standards, and they expect the banks, the credit unions to meet those standards. And reasonable is not an issue here. I mean, there may be a little area for some forgiveness, but for the most part, I mean, I was with a bank that failed a few years ago, and they had one CRA violation. And the examiner said, if you had two, we would have failed you. So there's not a lot of room for mistakes here. The examiners are out to get us. I have seen that on very, very rare occasion, and we've had to address that. But if you address that situation, be ready to get some pushback from the examiners the next time you have an examination, because the bureaucracies tend to work together and they tend to back each other up. So for the most part, though, I see the examiners are trying to do their jobs. And for the most part, 90+% of the time, the examiners are not out to get you. They're trying to do their job. Another place here, a lot of times they say, well, we'll just go hire a former regulator, and that's how we'll address these issues. The problem with hiring a former regulator in some cases is they've never actually worked in your business before. And you'll find they really don't know how to fix the problem. They know how to identify the problems. They know how to document the problems, but they don't know how to fix the problems once they move into the situation. Yogesh?
So Bob, thank you very much for all the denial aspects that you spoke. And the Hexanica marketing research team has done this analysis that you see on the screen, which highlights or reinforces some of the points that you mentioned. In the previous session that we did on why banks fail, you spoke about management oversight and board of directors oversight. That is the Ericsson State Bank. On the Resolute Bank, it's perhaps repetition of the same thing. In terms of City National Bank, it's focused on strategy, but essentially strategy is driven by the board and management, which is explicitly mentioned. And in case of Louisa Community Banks, it's ineffective and dysfunctional board of directors and executive management. So what you just mentioned is actually reinforced with these case studies, and the change needs to start from the top. That is what I think you are trying to reinforce. And then only the change can happen, whether it's operational change, technology change, people change. But on the right-hand side, that is the unfortunate result of the denials, where you have a list of overall failures of the bank. And that number is continuing. Means if you look at right from 2001, how many bank failures have happened, it continues to be there. Obviously, from 2008 post-financial crisis, the number has grown significantly. There is a continuous actually story of failures, and also there is stories of mergers and acquisitions. So not just because banks have closed down doesn't mean it's failed. Even if it is merged, acquired for other reasons, we will consider that as a weakness as well. So with that, what you see on the screen, which is essentially the proof points of what you just mentioned. Any closing comments before we move to what are the upcoming topics on Why Banks Fail series that we are doing? Bob, to you.
Thank you, Yogesh. Yeah, the one thing that we're not seeing in this chart is that the regulators in the last few years have placed a great deal of emphasis on forcing banks to sell out to other banks rather than the FDIC moving in and creating a receivership. So these numbers really are higher than we would like to think they are, because the number of failed banks does not reflect those banks that were forced to sell out. sometimes at very unreasonable terms. And we've seen that over and over and over the last 2-3 years. Yogesh?
Thank you, Bob. And I did briefly touch upon this point that number one is not only there will be M&As, force M&As, and also this is only one regulator, right? Banks could be registered, or non-banking financial institutions could also be in play, and credit unions have another viewpoint. So there are different regulators and other type of failures that may be happening in this case also. But yes, I agree that in some cases, especially if it's an FDIC institution, you will be forced to merge, which is essentially indirect failure than just you shutting down the business or closing the business. So, Bob, thank you very much for your time today. This was another interesting session. We focused on the governance board executive oversight. We do have some topics coming up, which we'll do perhaps maybe next month or in the month of January, around the lack of focus of the board, of the executive management. Then we will also cover some other aspects such as technology, new competition, and compliance. Obviously, you also participate in our broader session of fair lending, which is one of the compliances that the banks have. But thank you very much for joining this session. I hope everyone in the US are having a great Veterans Day today. And we will be posting this tomorrow. And please see it. If you have any questions, reach out to Bob Brown, or reach out to me, or reach out to anybody for that matter from Hexanica. And we will be happy to resolve any questions, any doubt that you have, or perhaps help you if you're thinking about change, if you're thinking about what should be a strategy in 2022. We'll be happy to share our thoughts. We look forward to continuing the HEXATalk discussion. Bob, thank you very much for joining this session again.